saying, well, I know I'm not doing the right thing, Lord, but I'll be in church on Sunday. I know I'm not doing the right thing, Lord, but I'll say the Lord's Prayer 5 times before I go to sleep. I don't know why you like me to repeat that so much, but I'll just say it again. And what they were doing was they forgot what sacrifices were all about. A sacrifice was, this was a ritual transaction between people and God to publicly show that I have a relationship with Him and that I trust Him. I'm taking the pride of my herd and offering it to the Lord because He commands it, because I trust Him. This is in payment for my sins. I'm a sinner, and He's the only one who can forgive me. That's why the sacrifices were to be given. And Saul now had turned it into some kind of game where I can sin with impunity, but God just must like a lot of meat. So we'll sacrifice a lot of meat. I don't know what He does with it. And so Samuel's telling him, look, rebellion is just as sinful as witchcraft, and stubbornness is as bad as worshiping idols, because you're not worshiping God anyway. Why would you want to demonstrate a relationship with a God that you don't care about? And that's where it applies to you and me. Why would we want to pretend at something? I mean, the reason that you and I would, hopefully the reason you and I gather for worship on Sunday mornings is so we can praise the Lord together and hear from His Word, so we can fellowship together and worship Him, stand in His presence and encourage one another. Hopefully that's the idea of gathering here. Not to salve our consciences. Well, I know I made a shady business deal this week, but I'll be there at 8 o'clock and I'll come again at 9:30, and then that'll make up for it. I mean, it's like the story of that guy who leaves a message at the IRS and calls in and says, I can't sleep, and so I'm sending in a check for the amount. And then a few minutes later, there's another message left. I still can't sleep, so I'm going to send the rest of it. Okay, or something like that. Hey, I want to get this off my conscience, but not all of it. I don't want to play games. And God was looking for a king who would lead His people with an honest and sincere heart, a person of integrity, and that wasn't Saul. Saul was after the applause of people. He didn't really care if he offended God. He wanted his troops to think he was great, so he let them keep the cattle. He didn't really care if he offended God. He wanted the people to think he was great, so he brought back the king. What about you and me? Do we value a relationship with God more than anything else? Because that's the point of this whole lesson today. Well, point 2 carries the story on a little further. Saul realized that God was with David and not with him when David went out to kill the giant, and Saul became insanely jealous of David and sought to kill him. Now, if you missed the lesson last week, you can go back online and hear this again, but to summarize, the Philistines, arch enemies of the Israelites, had come against them over a dispute over land and over territory in the Promised Land. Imagine Palestinians and Israelites fighting over land. I know this Bible is so irrelevant. I mean, who can imagine such things? But they were actually doing that in those days, and they still are. But the whole idea is that Saul became insanely jealous because one of the champions of the Philistine army had challenged the Israelite army. He was a giant, a freak of a man, over 9 feet tall. And David, a shepherd boy, had gone out there with a slingshot and a stone and killed him. And he'd done so because he had rightfully understood that the giant was defying God. And David trusted God and Saul didn't. And here's what happened after that battle. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, Goliath, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. They sang and they danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals, and this was their song. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Well, this made Saul very angry. What's this, he said. They credit David with 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next, they'll be making him their king. So from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. And Saul was then afraid of David, for the Lord was with David and had turned away from him. Saul remained David's enemy the rest of his life. Saul would put David in Saul. In fact, the people were so enamored with David, Saul was so jealous of him that he promoted David, even though he was young, to be a commander of battalions and other things, whole sections of his military. And he said, well, you go lead them into battle, David. And he was thinking the Philistines would do him in because this guy didn't have that much experience. But every time he sent him out, David would be victorious again. And so every time David won, Saul became more and more afraid of him to the point where he was so jealous he was insane. And there's a warning for you and me in this. Jealousy is a gateway sin. If you and I don't deal with jealousy in our lives, we're opening ourselves up to all kinds of other temptations. You know, there could be certain drugs, I guess, that be classified as gateway drugs. If you're willing to experiment with this, well, then soon you'll be experimenting with something worse. Well, this is a sin you don't want to play with because it's a gateway sin that opens us up to many other evil desires and sins. James talks about this in James 3:16. Wherever there's jealousy and selfish ambition, there you'll find disorder and every other kind of, and evil of every other kind. And it's true, isn't it? I mean, if you and I allow ourselves to be jealous of someone else's success in the company, jealous of what somebody else drives or wears or has, jealous of a relationship that somebody else has, that should have been me, that was my job, that was my promotion, that should have been my house. Well, it goes from resentment to bitterness to starting to scheme of what can I say to hurt them? What can I do to hurt them? And jealousy has been the motive for many horrible things. In fact, if you'd write in the margin there the word motive. I mean, motive is what we're talking about here. Motive in Saul's sacrifices. Hey, what was your motive, Saul? Because you love God and want to obey him fully and you're offering sacrifices to talk about how great he is and remind yourself of how sinful you are? Or are you doing this for public show? To pretend to be religious? And Saul, why are you putting David out as commander of your army? Because you trust him to lead your people? No, because you're jealous of him and hope the Philistines will do your dirty work for you. And that's what was going on. Many times people ask me, well, you read the Bible, you say the Bible's our guide in all matters of faith and practice. And I do say that all the time. And I wasn't the first one. I mean, I got that from John Wesley, said that more than anybody else. But the whole idea is that if I'm going to follow God's word in my life, people say, well, how could it be my guide? I mean, it doesn't tell me, John, it doesn't tell you, John, you shall take this job or you should do that. And I go, no, you're correct. But if I read the Bible with an honest attitude and an open heart, God will expose my motives. Does anybody else know what I'm talking about on this? Yeah. I can do the right thing for all the wrong reasons. I mean, if you saw somebody write a check to a charitable organization for a big chunk of money, and you go, wow, that's really wonderful, until you find out that along with the check, there had to be a plaque and there had to be a sign on their website promoting the business and all these things. You go, oh, okay, well, it changed it. And Saul had wrong motives. And David had a pure heart. So because Saul became insanely jealous and would no longer obey God, he saw God blessing David more and more, and he saw himself just collapsing. He saw his kingdom kind of caving in. He was losing control because every time he tried to do David in, David would excel and the Lord would bless him, and it made him even look better. And Saul decided, I got to kill this guy. I can't wait for the Philistines to do it. They aren't going to do it. I'm going to go kill him myself. And so by the time we get to 1 Samuel chapter 24, here's what's happening. Saul is chasing him. And so Saul chose 3,000 elite troops from all over Israel and went to search for David. David had left Saul's service and had gone into hiding. There were a couple hundred other men that had joined David. People who owed money, people who were in trouble with the law. So David kind of had a Robin Hood and his merry men kind of band here. And they were living out next to the Dead Sea. There's a place called En-Gedi there where there's a spring, a freshwater spring, but there are limestone cliffs all around the edge of the Dead Sea on the north side or on the west side. And if you wanted to, you could hide out in there. Some of those caves are big enough to hold 1,000 people. I mean, they're just hollowed out. And so David and his men were hanging out there, and they were hiding in the caves. They'd found one of these caves to be a hideout, and Saul is looking for him. Saul has taken 3,000 of his men, and they're going to go and find David and be rid of him once and for all. So Saul chose 3,000 elite troops from all over Israel, and they went to search for David and his men near the rocks of the wild goats. At the place where the road passes some sheepfolds, Saul went into a cave to relieve himself. I didn't misprint that. That's what it really says in the Bible, okay? People had to do that in that day too, okay? There was no rest area, and he had to go. He got off the interstate and found a cave. Okay, here's what it is. So he went into a cave to relieve himself, but as it happened, David and his men were hiding further back in that very cave. So Saul is insanely jealous. He's trying to hunt David down. David's done nothing wrong. But Saul is so jealous of him, he's going to try to kill him. And he's hiding in the cave. And now he goes to hunt him down, and now he goes into the cave where David and his men are hiding. Well, now's your opportunity, David's men whispered to him. Today the Lord is telling you, I'll certainly put your enemy into your power to do with as you wish. I mean, how else would you interpret this? I mean, you're hiding in a cave. The crazy guy, the crazy king who's coming out to kill you, comes in to relieve himself, takes off his armor and all this, and is in the cave, completely vulnerable. David, this has got to be the Lord handing him over to you. Go kill him. So David crept forward and cut off a piece of the hem of Saul's robe. But then David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut Saul's robe. The Lord knows I shouldn't have done that to my lord the king, he said to his men. The Lord forbid that I should do this to my lord the king and attack the Lord's anointed one. Please underline the Lord's anointed one. For the Lord himself has chosen him. In fact, underline that whole phrase there. So David restrained his men and did not let them kill Saul. Now you need to know that in the chapters that in between Goliath, the slaying of Goliath in this chapter, David had also been anointed. God had chosen Saul, and he told Saul, I'm going to give the kingdom to someone better than you. And he sent Samuel to anoint David as well. God had chosen Saul.